When you walk through the storm, have a good umbrella and maybe a nice heavy raincoat. If you have some handy, have some galoshes. There's a word you don't hear anymore, huh? Galoshes. So I was kind of thinking, what should we do for today's show? And I was running through some ideas, and then I thought the what the late great Regis Philbin used to say: if you don't have a good idea for your show, ask your audience. And so it's been a while, but I thought we'd dig into the old viewer mail and see what we could find. So I got one here. This is from Quasi in South Bend, Indiana. Interesting name. And it says, Hey Muckster, I attended your lecture at the Charleroi Holiday Inn, and I wondered if you could share with the rest of your audience the inspirational story you told about the guy in Elizabeth in England. Well, yeah, some of them have heard it, but maybe not all. And just so you know, it wasn't Elizabethan England, it was Victorian England. Not quite as far back, but still when most people, like horses and carriages were more common than motorized vehicles. Anyway, I'm sure the story he's thinking of is the one there's a kid was born with no arms. And you can imagine back then what things were like for people with any kind of disability. But they used to have back then, countries didn't really have like the welfare programs and stuff, but you'd have local community funds. And basically, this guy grew up as being taken care of by the community fund. And once he got to be an adult, he wanted to be useful in society. He didn't want to just sit around having other people do for him, bring him food and all that. And so he decided to take a walk down into the village and see if he could get a job. And he went around to the various shops asking, and everywhere he'd go, people would take one look at him and go, there's nothing you can do here, How are you gonna be a butcher with no arms? And, I've got nothing for you to do here. And he'd even say to someone, he'd go, well, you'd be surprised at how good I can work with my feet. And they'd say, who's going to want to buy my merchandise after you've had your feet all over it? So he had about given up. He was dejected, getting ready to walk home, and he sees the church and he thinks, yeah, why not try there? I've tried everywhere else. And he goes inside and he sees the preacher. And he says, hey, Pastor, can I talk to you? And the preacher says, sure, what can I do for you, my son? He says, I've grown up all my life being supported by the community fund. But I'd like to be independent. I'd like to help society. He said, so would you happen to have any jobs around here? And the preacher says, really the only job opening I would have is it just so happens that 2 days ago, our bell ringer moved to another town because his wife wanted to be closer to her family. He said, he says, I don't know how you could do that job, but if you could have that. And so the guy says, all right, let me give it a try. And he goes walking over. And, they would have, the bells would be up in a spire, or some would call it a tower. And rope would come down, and you pull the rope. So he goes walking over to where the rope is, and the preacher is thinking, is he going to like jump and grab it with his teeth and yank it up and down or what? But then he walks right past the rope to the steps to go up into the tower. And the preacher follows him up, and they go up into the tower. And the preacher's like, what are you going to do now? And the guy backs up to the edge of the tower, and he goes running straight at the bell and dives headfirst into it. Bong! And he stumbles back and looks at the preacher and says, well, and the preacher says, well, if you could do that 3 times a day, you got the job. The guy's great. So for the next couple of weeks, 3 times a day, morning, noon, night, that guy shows up to work, backs up and runs across the floor and bong into the bell. Till one day, the cleaning lady decides she hadn't cleaned up in the tower lately. So in between the morning bell and the noon bell, she went up there and dusted and scrubbed the floor. And so when the guy comes to do the noon bell, he didn't really notice the place looking any different. And unfortunately, he didn't notice the puddle that she'd left on the floor. And he backs up to the wall and he goes running across the floor. And his foot hits the puddle and he slips. And he goes flying right out the other side of the tower, smack down onto the cobblestone road down below. And a crowd comes gathering around, and they're there talking. And after a few minutes, the town constable comes, and what's going on here? What's going on? He pushes his way in. He says, what's happening here? And someone says, Constable, this man just came falling out of the sky. He says, that doesn't seem likely. He says, but he says, does anybody know who the guy is? And the one guy steps forward and he says, well, I don't know his name, but his face rings a bell. So the moral of the story is, no matter how bad off you have it, you think you can't get a job, just cut your arms off and, what do you mean that's not the moral? Well, I guess maybe the moral is make sure the floor is dry. No. Okay, then what the hell is the moral? Oh, I guess the moral is something about never give up, keep trying. I don't know. I like my moral better, though. Anyway, that's the story of the armless guy in England. I hope you feel inspired. And Quasi in South Bend, you got yourself a t-shirt. As I've said before, just go on down to Target, or as the cool kids call it, Target. Pick out whatever t-shirt you want, that if you can find one to fit you, and take it up to the cash register, tell them Muxter sent you, and then pay for the t-shirt and leave. Thank you for your question, and I'm glad to hear you attended my lecture at the Holiday Inn there in Charleroi. In a couple of weeks, I have a engagement coming up at the Chuckle Hut in Dayton. Maybe I'll see you there too, huh? That's it for now. Let's muckster. Peace out.